Hi, so I want to read a story. It's a novel called Rascal. It's actually an autobiography written by Sterling North about his childhood. Now, a little bit about him, I looked him up. It says Thomas Sterling North was born November 4th, 1906. He died December 22nd, 1974. He was an American author of books for children and adults, including Rascal, which was a bestseller in 1963. Which is, I guess I can't tell you that. He was born in 1906 in a pleasant little farmhouse on the shores of Lake Koshkonong, the second largest lake in Wisconsin, and he grew up in a nearby town of Edgerton. And then after he graduated, he started writing for a couple of newspapers. And then in 1947, he wrote a book called So Dear to My Heart, and it became a bestseller and established him as one of America's favorite novelists back then. And that book was translated into 26 languages and it charmed motion picture audiences everywhere when it was filmed by Walt Disney. Now, Rascal is an autobiography and it's a story about raising a raccoon. And it was published in 1963 and immediately captured the hearts of both young and old. More than 2.5 million copies have been sold. The story was translated into 18 other languages and was made into a film by Walt Disney for release in 1969. And the true story is from the author's boyhood when he takes in a mischievous, endearing raccoon that he names Rascal. And Rascal is the most captivating creature imaginable. Okay, so we're going to read this book together. I'll start with the first chapter and see what you think. And maybe it's something you want to purchase or to continue reading or to read as a book club group. I think that you'll enjoy it. The first chapter is called May. So if you have the book and you want to follow along, on page 15, the first chapter begins May. It was May 1918 that a new friend and companion came into my life, a character, a personality, and a ring tailed wonder. He weighed less than 1 pound when I discovered him, a furry ball of utter dependence and awakening curiosity, weaned and defenseless. Wowzer and I were immediately protective. We would have fought any boy or dog in town who sought to harm him. Wowzer was an exceptionally intelligent and responsible watchdog, guarding our house and lawns and gardens and all my pets. But because of his vast size, 170 pounds of muscled grace and elegance, he seldom had to resort to violence. He could shake any dog on the block as a terrier shakes a rat. Wowzer never started a fight, but after being challenged, badgered, and insulted, he eventually would turn his worried face and great sad eyes upon his tormentor and, more in sorrow than in anger, grab the intruder by the scruff of the neck and toss him into the gutter. Wowzer was an affectionate, perpetually hungry St. Bernard. Like most dogs of his breed, he drooled a little. In the house, he had to lie with his muzzle on a bath towel, his eyes downcast as though in slight disgrace. Pat Delaney, a saloon keeper who lived a couple of blocks up the street, said that St. Bernards drool for the best of all possible reasons. He explained that in the Alps, these noble dogs set forth every winter day with little kegs of brandy strapped beneath their chins to rescue wayfarers lost in the snowdrifts. Generations of carrying the brandy, of which they had never tasted so much as a blessed drop, have made them so thirsty that they continuously drool. The trade had now become hereditary. That means it's passed on from generation to generation, Pat said, and whole litters of bright and thirsty little St. Bernards are born drooling for brandy. On this pleasant afternoon in May, Wowzer and I started up First Street toward Crescent Drive, where A semicircle of late Victorian houses enjoyed a hilltop view. Northward lay miles of meadows, groves of trees, and a winding stream, and the best duck and muskrat marsh in Rock County. As we turned down a country lane past Bardine's orchard and vineyard, the signature of spring was everywhere: violets, anemones in the grass, apple trees in promising bud along the bough. Ahead, some of the most productive walnut and hickory trees I had ever looted, a good swimming hole in the creek, and in one bit of forest, a real curiosity, a phosphorescent stump which gleamed at night with foxfire as luminescent as all the lightning bugs in the world, ghostly and terrifying to boys who saw it for the first time. It scared me witless as I came home one evening from fishing. So I made a point to bring my friends that way on other evenings, not wishing to be selfish about my pleasures. Oscar Sutherland saw me as I passed his bleak farmhouse far down that lane. He was a friend of mine who knew enough to talk, not talk when we went fishing. That's a good friend, and we were trapping partners on the marsh. His mother was a gentle Norwegian woman who spoke English with no trace of an accent, and also her native language. His father, Herman Sutherland, was another kettle of Hassenpfeffer. German on his mother's side and Swedish on his father's, with a temper and dialect all his own. Oscar's mother baked delicious Norwegian pastries, particularly around Christmas time, sometimes placing them before me, a plate of her delicacies. She would say something tender in Norwegian. I always turned away to hide the shameful moisture in my eyes. As Mrs. Sutherland knew, my mother had died when I was 7, and I think that is why she was especially kind to me. Oscar's tough old father presented no such problem. I doubt he had ever said anything kind to anyone in his life. Oscar was very much afraid of him and risked a whipping if we were not home in time to help with the milking. No one was concerned about the hours I kept. I was a very competent 11-year-old. If I had come along after dark, my father would meekly look up from his book to greet me vaguely and courteously. He allowed me to live my own life, keep pet skunks and woodchucks in the backyard and the barn, pamper my tame crow, and my many cats, and my faithful St. Bernard. He let me build my 18-foot canoe in the living room. I had not entirely completed the framework, so it would take another year at least. When we had visitors, they sat in the easy chairs surrounding the canoe or skirted the prow to reach the great shelves of books we were continuously lending. We lived alone and liked it, cooked and cleaned in our own fashion, and paid little attention to the indignant housewives who told my father that this was no way to bring up a child. So indignant, they're kind of angry about it, and they're kind of showing their distaste for his raising his son that way. My father agreed amiably. That means he's just being considerate and kind and in how he responds, not in an angry tone. That this might well be true, and then returned to his endless research for a novel concerning the Fox and Winnebago Indians, for which some reason was never published. I'm headed for Wentworth Woods, I told Oscar, and I may not be home before moonrise. Wait a minute, Oscar said. We'll need something to eat. He returned so swiftly with a paper sack filled with coffee cake and cookies that I knew he had swiped them. You'll get a licking when you get home. Ishkabibble, I should worry, Oscar said, a happy grin spreading across his wide face. We crossed a creek on the stepping stones below the dam. Pickerel were making their season run up the stream. We nearly caught one with our hands as he snaked his way between the stones. Killdeer started up from the marshy shallows, crying, Killdeer, Killdeer, as though a storm were brewing. Wowzer had many virtues, but he was not a hunting dog. So we were much surprised when in Wentworth's woods he came to a virtual point. Oscar and I waited silently while the St. Bernard, on his great paws, paddled softly to the hollow base of a rotten stump. He sniffed the hole critically, then turned and whined, telling us plainly that something lived in that den. "Dig him out, Wowzer," I shouted. "He won't dig," Oscar predicted. "He's too lazy." "You just watch," I said loyally. But I wasn't betting any glass marbles. In another minute, was making the dirt fly, and Oscar and I were helping in a frenzy of excitement. We scooped the soft earth with our hands and used our pocket knives when we came to old decaying roots. "I'll bet it's a fox," I panted hopefully. "Probably an old woodchuck," Oscar said. But we couldn't have been more surprised when a furious mother raccoon exploded from her lair, screaming her rage and dismay. Wowzer nearly fell over backward to avoid the flying claws and the slashing little teeth. A moment later, the big raccoon had racked her way up a slender oak tree. 30 feet above us, she continued to scream and scold. In plain sight now within the den, we found 4 baby raccoons, a month old perhaps. The entire litter of kits might have easily fitted within my cap. Each tail had 5 black rings. Each small face had a sharp black mask. 8 bright eyes peered up at us, filled with wonder and worry. And from 4 inquiring little mouths came whimpered questions. "Good old Wowzer," I said. "That's a pretty good dog you've got there," Oscar admitted, "but you'd better hold him back." "He wouldn't hurt them. He takes care of all my pets." In fact, the big dog settled down with a sigh of satisfaction as near to the nest as possible, ready to adopt one or all of these interesting little creatures. But there was one service he could not render. He could not feed them. "We can't take them home without their mother," I told Oscar. "They're too young." "How do we catch the mother?" Oscar asked. "We draw straws." "And then what?" "The one who gets the short straw shinnies up the tree and catches her." "Oh, no," said Oscar. "Oh, no, you don't. I ain't that crazy." "Come on, Oscar." "No, sirree." But at just this moment, the 4 little raccoons set up such a plaintive quavering that we all felt miserable. We had to catch that mother raccoon. Wowzer was as sad as I was. He pointed his big muzzle toward the evening sky and howled mournfully. "Well," Oscar said, kicking his shoe into the fresh dirt, "I'd better be getting home to help with the milking." "Quitter," I taunted. "Who's a quitter?" "You're a quitter." "Well, okay, I'll draw straws, but I think you're loony." I held the straws, and Oscar drew the long one. Naturally, I had to live up to my bargain. I looked far above me. In the fading glow of the sunset, there she still was, 20 pounds of ring-tailed dynamite. I patted Wowzer as though for the last time and began my tough scramble up that slender trunk. As I shinnied up the tree in no great hurry to tangle with the raccoon, I had one piece of good fortune. The full moon began to rise above the eastern hill, giving me a little more light for my dangerous maneuver. Far out on the first limb, the outraged animal took a firm stance, facing me, her eyes glowing balefully in the moonlight. That means she's threatening him with her look, kind of giving him the stink eye. "I'm going to cut off the branch with my jackknife," I told Oscar. "And then what?" "You're supposed to catch her when she falls in the hazel brush." Oscar suggested I had bats in my belfry. Now that's an idiom for being crazy. But he took off his corduroy jacket and prepared to throw it over the raccoon in a do or die effort for which he had little enthusiasm. Whittling through 2.5 inches of white oak with a fairly dull jackknife is a laborious process, as I soon discovered. I was in a cramped position, holding on with my left hand and hacking away at the wood with my right, and I feared the raccoon might try to rush me when the limb began to break. The moon rose slowly through the trees as blisters rose slowly on my right hand, but I couldn't weaken now. From far below came the whimpering of the raccoon kits and an occasional mournful howl from Wowzer. Tree toads and frogs in the swamp began their chorus, and a little screech owl, sounding almost like another raccoon, added to the added an eerie tremolo. "How are you coming?" Oscar asked. "Coming fine. Get ready to catch her." "Count on me," Oscar said, his voice less convincing than his brave words. The tasseled limb of the white oak sighed at last, broke with a snap, and drifted down to the hazel brush below. Oscar tried. I will give him credit for that. He tangled for 5 seconds with that raccoon and then retreated with the damaged jacket. Three of the little raccoons, hearing their mother's call, trundled with amazing swiftness into the hazel brush to follow her and were gone. Oscar, however, was quick enough to cup one kit in his cap, our only reward for our labor, but reward enough as time would prove. As nearly as we could tell, the handsome, sharply marked little animal was covered only with soft gray underfur, having few of the darker guard hairs which would later gleam on the adult raccoon. He was the only baby raccoon I had ever held in my hands. As he nestled upward like a quail chick and nuzzled like a puppy seeking its mother's milk, I was both overwhelmed with ecstasy of ownership and frightened by the enormous responsibility we had assumed. Wowzer romped beside us through the moonlight, often coming to sniff and lick the new pet we had found. This bit of mass mischief which had stolen his heart as well as my own. "He's yours," Oscar said sadly. "My old man would never let me keep him. He shot a coon in the chicken house just a few weeks ago." "You can come and see him," I suggested. "Sure, I can come and see him." We walked in silence for a time, thinking of the injustices of the world that made so few allowances for the nature of raccoons and boys our age. Then we began talking about all the raccoons we had ever seen and how we would feed this kit and teach him all the things he would have to learn. "I seen a raccoon mother once with 5 kits," Oscar said. "What were they doing?" "She was leading them along the edge of a stream. They did everything she did." "Like what?" "Feeling around with their front paws, hunting for crawdads, I guess." On the horizon, there were flashes of distant lightning and low, rumbling thunder, sounding like artillery many miles away. It reminded us that the war was still raging in France and that maybe my brother Herschel was being moved up to the front. I hated to think about that terrible war which had been killing and wounding millions of men ever since the year my mother died. Here we were, safe and remote from the war, and worrying about such small, unimportant things as whether Oscar would get a whipping when he got home and how to feed and raise a little raccoon. When we came up on the lane toward the Sutherlands farm, Oscar began saying, "Ishkabibble, I should worry," but he acted worried to me. When we reached his front yard, he dared me and double dared me to go up and knock on the door. Meanwhile, he hid behind a flowering spirea bush and waited to see what might happen. Oscar was wise to let me do the knocking. Herman Sutherland came storming out, swearing in German and Swedish. He was certainly angry with Oscar, and he didn't seem to like me very much either. "Where that no good son of mine?" "It wasn't Oscar's fault," I said. "I asked him to come for a walk with me, and—" "Where is he now?" "Well," I said. "Well, what you mean, well?" "We dug out a den of raccoons," I said, "and here is the one we brought home." "Coons!" shouted Sutherland. "Verdante varmits!" I was afraid that Mr. Sutherland might flush Oscar from behind the spirea bush, but just at that moment, Oscar's gracious mother came out on the front porch, the moonlight shining on her silvering hair. And then there's a picture of her. Go to bed, Herman, she said quietly. I will take care of this. Come out, Oscar, from behind the bush. To my surprise, Oscar's father meekly obeyed, taking a lamp up that long, dark parlor stairway, his shadow much taller than himself. And Oscar's mother took us to the kitchen where she fed us a warm supper and began to heat a little milk to the temperature that would be right for a human baby. It's hungry, the little one, she said, petting the small raccoon. Go fetch a clean wheat straw, Oscar. She filled her own mouth with warm milk, put the wheat straw between her lips, and slanted the straw downward to the mouth of the little raccoon. I watched, fascinated, as my new pet took the straw eagerly and began to nurse. Look how the little one eats, Oscar's mother said. This is the way you will have to feed him, Sterling. And that is the end of chapter 1, May. The next chapter is June. I hope you're enjoying it. Hopefully, you can get a copy yourself or listen each night, and you can even take an AR test.